Imagine, like, judging the power of a car engine just by looking at the smoke coming out of the exhaust pipe.
Right, like that's all you have to go on.
Exactly. And according to the text we're unpacking today, that's exactly what historians do when they only look at, politicians and treaties and wars to understand how the world works.
Yeah, they're just analyzing the exhaust.
Right. They're looking at the smoke. But if you actually want to know how the machine moves, you have to look under the hood. You have to, dive into the political economy.
Because that is where the gears are actually turning. I mean, the political events are really just the byproducts of those economic gears grinding against each other.
And today we are looking at the exact moment two very distinct thinkers decided to, stop looking at the smoke and started tearing apart the engine.
Yeah, we are going deep into the Marx and Engels collected works.
Which, just for context for you listening, this collection is monumental. I mean, we were talking about 50 volumes of material.
It's massive. It has everything. Major books, articles, personal letters.
Unfinished notebooks, unpublished manuscripts. It's a staggering archive.
It really is.
But, we aren't getting lost in all 50 volumes today. That would take years.
Decades, probably.
Right. So our mission today is to zoom in on a very specific, a really pivotal 18-month window. We're looking at Volume 3, which covers the spring of 1843 to August of 1844.
Which is arguably the most critical window in their entire intellectual development.
Yeah, I really want to frame this as an origin story for anyone listening. Because whether you're like an economics student or a history buff or just insanely curious about how massive world-altering ideas actually form.
How the sausage gets made, essentially.
Exactly. This deep dive explores a singular moment in time. We are looking at the exact window where these two thinkers, completely independently, arrived at the same revolutionary worldview.
And this is just before they actually met in person, which is wild.
It is wild. And just to pause for a quick second here, because we are dealing with Marx and Engels, right?
Two names that obviously carry immense political baggage today.
A ton of baggage. So for you listening, we're not here to take a political stance. We're not here to endorse a manifesto. Or condemn one, for that matter.
Right. We're putting on our historian hats.
Yes, purely to analyze the source material and see how these highly charged economic and social theories were actually originally formulated back in the 1840s.
It's a necessary boundary to set, I think, because to understand the theories, you really have to understand the specific historical pressure cooker they were formed in.
Absolutely.
I mean, these ideas didn't just fall out of the sky. They were forged by the material conditions surrounding the thinkers in 1843.
So let's look at those conditions, right? Starting with Marx. Because we are dealing with two separate individuals in vastly different geographical and intellectual environments.
Very different.
Yeah, so in 1843, Marx goes through a massive personal transition. Over the summer, he marries Jenny von Westphalen in Trier.
Right.
But wait. If I'm reading the background right, she is the daughter of a privy councillor.
She is, yeah.
So she's firmly in the upper echelons of Prussian society.
Oh, absolutely. Elite.
Right. So if Marx is marrying into the Prussian elite and, could easily secure a comfortable, privileged life for himself.
Which he definitely could have.
Why on earth is he suddenly obsessed with tearing down the entire economic system? That seems completely counterintuitive to me.
It does seem contradictory at first glance. But you have to look at what Marx was trying to do professionally at the time.
Okay, unpack that for us.
Well, he was a radical journalist, right? And an intellectual. He had been editing a paper called the Rheinische Zeitung.
The Rhineland News, basically.
Exactly. And the paper was heavily critical of the Prussian government. So the government responded by shutting the paper down and imposing severe censorship.
Oh, wow. So they just killed it entirely.
Killed it. So Marx might have had connections through his marriage, but intellectually and professionally, he was completely suffocating under the authoritarian weight of the Prussian state.
He couldn't do the work he wanted to do.
Right. He realized that Germany was intellectually stunted. He couldn't write, he couldn't publish, he couldn't even really think freely there.
Which forces him to move.
Yes.
So in October of 1843, he leaves Germany and he heads to Paris. And Paris in 1843 is not just, a romantic city for artists.
Yeah.
It is an absolute cauldron.
Oh, it is the intellectual heart of European radicalism at this time.
Like a hotbed.
Completely.
Right.
When Marx arrives, he isn't just sitting in quiet cafes drinking espresso. He finds himself immersed in this atmosphere of intense, underground socialist agitation.
Secret societies, right?
Yes. Paris was crawling with secret societies, like the League of the Just. There were radical workers' groups, utopian thinkers.
And a ton of exiled revolutionaries from all over the continent who had basically been chased out of their home countries.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The theoretical debates about the future of society were happening there at an absolute fever pitch.
So Marx is suddenly swimming in an environment where revolution isn't just this like abstract philosophical concept.
No, it's being actively organized in the taverns and salons all around him.
Right. So Marx is in this intense intellectual laboratory in Paris.
It's a great way to put it.
But to see how these economic sources were actually crushing the working class in real time, you couldn't really look at Paris. You had to look at England.
You had to look at the factories.
Right. Which brings us to Friedrich Engels.
So Engels had been living in England since November of 1842, specifically in Manchester.
Okay, let's talk about Manchester in 1842 and 1843, because this is the bleeding edge of industrial capitalism.
It is the absolute shock city of the Industrial Revolution.
What does that mean, a shock city?
I mean, it's defined by these massive textile factories, skies completely choked with smoke. You have staggering, just unprecedented wealth for the factory owners.
And then the exact opposite for the workers.
Right. Absolutely crushing, squalid poverty for the workers. And it's all layered directly on top of each other.
Like literally living in the shadows of the mansions.
Exactly. And furthermore, Engels isn't just passively observing this from afar. He's working in his father's textile firm.
Oh, wow. So he's management.
He sees the management side, yes. But he is also establishing very close links with the working class movements on the ground.
The Chartists specifically, right?
The Chartists, yes.
And I want to be clear about what the Chartists were dealing with in 1843. For you listeners who follow 19th century history, you know the aftermath of the 1842 general strike was fresh.
Very fresh. The tension was palpable.
Yeah, the British working class wasn't just, politely asking for voting rights in Parliament. They were in the middle of a massive, heavily suppressed, structural fight against the industrial elite.
They were. The 1842 strikes had been crushed violently, and the workers were dealing with the fallout from that. Engels is witnessing this firsthand.
He's right in the middle of it.
Right. And he's also interacting with the Owenite socialists who are trying to build cooperative communities. He is seeing the raw physical reality of class struggle literally on the streets of Manchester.
It reminds me of two engineers trying to reverse engineer a machine.
Okay, how so?
Well, Marx is in Paris, right?
Right.
And he's reading the theoretical blueprints. He's trying to find the structural flaws in the design of the state itself.
All right, the theory.
But meanwhile, Engels is standing on the actual factory floor in Manchester, watching the gears literally grind people up.
Yeah.
Like they're approaching the exact same problem from entirely different vantage points. One is in a pristine lab, and the other is in a pandemic hot zone.
That is the perfect way to look at it, actually. And what Volume 3 of the Collected Works documents is how both of these men in these completely different environments make the exact same transition.
Simultaneously.
Yes. The prefaces to Volume 3 explicitly state that this 18-month window is the period where both men transition from idealism to materialism.
Okay, we'll need to define that.
We will. And from revolutionary democracy to communism.
I really want to dig into those transitions, especially that first one. Because for Marx, rewiring his worldview meant tearing down the philosophies he had previously studied.
He had to clear the board entirely.
Right. And you can't build a new engine if you're still stubbornly attached to the old parts. So let's look at his work in Paris. How did the specific radical environment of Paris translate into what he was actually putting on paper?
Well, he begins dismantling the previous philosophical frameworks, specifically the framework of Hegel.
Okay, so to understand the break, we have to understand what he was breaking from, right?
Exactly. In the spring and summer of 1843, Marx writes this piece called His Contribution to the Critique of Hegel's Philosophy of Law.
Catchy title.
Very 19th century German philosophy. Now, at this time, Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel was the undisputed dominant philosophical figure in Germany, like the final boss of philosophy.
He was everywhere.
Yes. And Hegel's system was rooted in this concept of idealism.
Okay, what does idealism mean in this context?
Simply put, Hegel believed that the development of human history was driven by the evolution of ideas, of spirit, or human consciousness.
So ideas drive reality.
Exactly. And for Hegel, the ultimate realization of the spirit, the highest form it took, was the state.
Like the government.
Right. The state was the embodiment of rationality and ethics for Hegel.
But the intellectuals who came after Hegel, the young Hegelians,
Right.
they started poking holes in that theory, particularly when it came to religion.
Yes, exactly. So the prevailing intellectual trend among these young Hegelians was to critique the Prussian state indirectly by critiquing religion.
Kind of a proxy war.
Exactly. Thinkers like Ludwig Feuerbach were making huge waves by arguing that religion was essentially just a human projection.
Like, we invented it.
Right. Feuerbach argued that humans invent God, we give God all our best qualities, love, power, wisdom, and then we submit to this illusion, thereby alienating ourselves from our own essence.
So we give away our own power to an imaginary figure.
Precisely. And the young Hegelians thought that if they could just debunk religion, if they could show people it was an illusion, they could free human consciousness.
And then the oppressive state would logically just crumble.
That was the idea, yes.
But wait, if critiquing religion was like the edgy, progressive thing to do among all his peers, why did Marx break away from that pack?
Yeah.
Like, what made him realize religion wasn't the root issue?
Because Marx realized that the X-ray machine of philosophy, so to speak, was only looking at the surface.
You wanted to go deeper.
Yeah, he looked at Feuerbach and thought, okay, you've proved that man makes religion, religion doesn't make man. Great.
Good job.
But why does man make religion in the first place?
Ooh, that's a great question.
Right. Marx concludes that humans create the illusion of religion to cope with the very real earthly suffering caused by their material conditions.
So religion is just the painkiller.
It's just the painkiller. If you want to cure the disease, you can't just critique the painkiller. You have to look at the material reality, the laws, the property relations, the state that causes the pain in the first place.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah.
Which is why he shifts gears completely. He stops writing these abstract critiques of heaven, and he starts focusing aggressively on earth. And this is documented in something called the Kreuznach notebooks, which he compiles right around this time, right? What exactly is he looking for in these notebooks?
Well, the Kreuznach notebooks are basically a record of his intense historical research.
Like raw data collection.
Absolutely. He's studying a massive range of topics. The history of the state, property laws, world history, the English Revolution, the French Revolution.
He's looking for patterns.
He is devouring data about how governments are actually built and destroyed in the real world. He's moving away from the idea that the state is some noble embodiment of human spirit, like Hegel thought.
And what does he realize instead?
He realizes that the state is just a tool created by whoever holds the property.
But hold on, if Hegelian philosophy is all about ideas shaping reality, why is Marx suddenly caring about, like, property laws in the 17th century? That seems so mundane.
Because this is the exact moment of transition from idealism to materialism.
Okay, break that down for us.
So idealism says ideas shape the physical world, right? Materialism flips that entirely on its head. Materialism argues that the physical economic world, how we produce food, how we distribute resources, who owns the land, that physical reality determines our ideas, our laws, and our state.
Oh, wow. So the physical stuff creates the ideas, not the other way around.
Exactly. Marx realizes that you cannot understand a society by analyzing its ideas in a vacuum. The state doesn't create property relations create the state.
That is a monumental paradigm shift. He's realizing that law and the state are basically just the HR department for the economic system.
With the HR department, that's exactly it.
Right, like they just exist to enforce the rules of whoever controls the resources.
Precisely.
And once he realizes that the state is driven by economics, he turns his full attention to political economy. Which leads us to one of the most famous texts in this entire 50-volume set, the Economic and Philosophic Manuscripts of 1844.
Right, the 1844 manuscripts. This is where we see the actual birth of Marxist economics.
The real deal.
Oh, yeah. The 1844 manuscripts represent the very first time Marx attempts to systematically elaborate political economy from a dialectical materialist standpoint.
Okay, I need to pause on dialectical materialist because that phrase gets thrown around a lot, often without any real context.
Yeah.
What does it actually mean in terms of how Marx is looking at economics in 1844?
Well, let's take dialectics first. It's a method of understanding change.
Okay.
It's the idea that progress doesn't happen in a straight, peaceful, linear line. It happens through contradictions and conflicts.
Like pushing against something.
Right. A system generates opposing forces, those forces clash, and a new reality is born from that clash.
And Hegel did this too. Yeah.
Yes, but Hegel applied dialectics to ideas. One idea clashes with its opposite to create a better idea. Marx takes that dialectical method but applies it to materialism, to the physical economic world.
So instead of ideas clashing in the sky, it's economic classes clashing on the ground.
Precisely. He applies dialectics to the factory system itself. He argues that capitalism, by its very nature, creates opposing forces that cannot be reconciled.
Because their interests are completely opposed.
Exactly. The drive for profit requires the continuous exploitation of labor. So you have the class that owns the factories, the bourgeoisie, and the class that has nothing to sell but their labor, the proletariat.
The workers.
Right. The manuscript emphasizes the decisive role of production, arguing that private property and the division of labor are the literal material basis for society's division into these hostile classes.
And what does that actually look like on a human level in these texts? Because, one of the most famous concepts to come out of the 1844 manuscripts is alienated labor or estranged labor.
Yes, highly influential concept.
What does alienated labor actually mean for a worker in the context of 1844? Like, how does Marx define it?
Marx breaks alienation down into 4 distinct dimensions, and it's profoundly psychological as much as it is economic.
Okay, let's go through them. What's the first one?
First, the worker is alienated from the product of their labor.
Meaning the physical thing they are making.
Right. Under the factory system, you work all day to create an object, say a bolt of cloth or a pair of shoes, but you don't own it.
It's not yours.
It belongs to someone else. And it is used to enrich them, not you. So your own creation stands opposed to you as this alien power.
Because the more you produce, the cheaper you become as a commodity yourself.
Exactly. You are feeding the machine that oppresses you.
God, that's bleak. Okay, what's the second dimension?
Second, the worker is alienated from the act of production itself.
Like the actual day-to-day work.
Yeah. The labor isn't voluntary. It's forced by the necessity to survive. You have to do it to eat.
Right.
It's deeply repetitive, soul-crushing work that literally ruins the mind and the body. You aren't expressing yourself, you're just turning a crank.
You're a cog. Okay. And the third?
Third, and this is where Marx gets quite philosophical, the worker is alienated from their species being.
Species being. Like human nature.
Yes, their human essence. Marx believed humans are naturally creative beings who want to consciously shape their world.
We want to build and design and imagine.
Right. But industrial labor reduces human activity to the level of basic animal survival.
So you only feel human when you are not working.
Exactly. When you are eating, drinking, or sleeping. When you are actually working, you feel like a machine.
Wow. And the fourth dimension?
The fourth dimension is that the worker is alienated from other human beings.
Because of the competition.
Exactly. If your labor is just a commodity to be bought and sold on the market, you view other workers not as fellow humans, but as competitors for wages.
If they take a lower wage, you lose your job.
Right. And you view the capitalist as an enemy. So the entire social fabric is reduced to hostile economic transactions.
He's basically writing the ultimate diagnostic manual for the psychological and structural rot of capitalism.
He really is.
And what is wild to me is that these ideas, as radical and complex as they are, actually land him a publishing contract.
They do. In February 1845, based on the foundational ideas forming in these exact manuscripts, Marx signs a contract with a Darmstadt publisher named Karl Lesk.
For an actual book.
Yes. The book was slated to be called A Critique of Politics and of Political Economy.
But the book never sees the light of day, right?
No, it doesn't. By September of 1846, Lesk formally cancels the contract.
Why? Did Marx miss his deadline?
No, the political climate was just too volatile. Lesk was terrified of censorship and police persecution.
The Prussian authorities.
Right. Marx was already on the radar of European authorities as a dangerous agitator, and a mainstream publisher simply couldn't risk the heat of printing a systematic, revolutionary critique of the entire economic and political structure.
This detail about the canceled contract is fascinating to me.
It's a huge turning point.
Yeah, think about it from a modern perspective for a second. A highly anticipated, highly controversial book deal gets killed by government pressure. But this setback ends up being like one of the most consequential butterfly effects in the history of economics.
How so? How are you framing it?
Because Les killed the short, early, probably pretty unpolished version of the book, right? Marx was forced to take a step back.
True.
If that book had been published in 1846, maybe he feels he has said his piece and he just moves on to something else. But instead, because it was suppressed, he ends up spending the next 2 decades sitting in the reading room of the British Museum, meticulously refining, expanding, and obsessing over these theories.
Which ultimately results in his massive, multi-volume magnum opus Capital.
Exactly.
Yeah, you're right. The 1844 manuscripts are effectively the rough DNA of Capital. They contain the core thesis. But the cancellation of that early contract absolutely forced Marx to dedicate the rest of his life to producing the thousands of pages of rigorous economic proof that make up volumes 30 through 37 of the collected works.
Sometimes a closed door is what forces you to build an entirely new house.
Very true.
So while Marx is in Paris writing The DNA of Capital and dealing with canceled book deals, what is Engels doing? Because remember, our other engineer is on the factory floor in Manchester.
Right, he isn't writing philosophical manuscripts about Hegel.
No, he's turning his raw observations into journalism.
And Engels' journalism in this specific period is absolutely vital to their convergence.
What was he writing for?
Well, in late 1843, Engels begins contributing to a Chartist paper in England called the Northern Star.
Which was a massive platform, right? The
Yeah.
Chartists had a huge working-class readership.
It was the primary organ of the working class movement in Britain. It was huge. Engels is writing articles for them, focusing on the democratic and the socialist movements back in Central Europe.
Kind of being a foreign correspondent.
Exactly. And the source material for this volume specifically highlights his articles titled News from Prussia and Further Particulars of the Silesian Riots.
Let's talk about the Silesian Weavers' Uprising, because this wasn't just a minor historical footnote in their work. What exactly happened in Silesia, and why did Engels fixate on it so much?
Well, Silesia was a region in Prussia that had a massive population of traditional textile weavers.
Like handloom weavers.
Yes, traditional craftsmen. In the summer of 1844, these weavers were facing absolute starvation.
Why? What changed?
They were being completely undercut by the mechanization of the industry, and they were being ruthlessly squeezed by the merchants and contractors who controlled the supply chain.
So they just couldn't compete with the new machines.
Exactly. So, desperate and starving, they rose up in a violent revolt. They smashed machinery. They destroyed the homes of the wealthy merchants, and they actually fought the Prussian military before they were violently suppressed.
Wow. But, okay, play devil's advocate for a second. Why does a British factory worker reading the Northern Star on a Sunday in Manchester care about a bunch of German weavers in Prussia?
It seems disconnected, right?
Yeah, it's a completely different country, a totally different government, even a different stage of industrialization.
Right, but that's the genius of what Engels was doing, because Engels interpreted the uprising in a way that connected them directly. He didn't report it as just a tragic, localized riot caused by a few greedy Prussian merchants. He analyzed the uprising of the Silesian weavers as a confirmation of the universal character of capitalism's contradictions.
Oh, so he spots the structural pattern.
He realizes that the emergence of the factory system and the rule of capital has the exact same effects everywhere it goes, no matter the country.
So the mechanics are the same.
Yes. The struggles of the traditional workers in Germany, the Silesian weavers, are identical in their root cause to the struggles of the factory workers he is watching every day in Manchester.
The enemy is the system itself.
Exactly. He sees that the mechanics of the engine are exactly the same regardless of what country the car is driving in.
So he's taking this massive abstract concept of global capitalism, making it incredibly tangible for the British reader.
Very tangible.
He's essentially saying, look at Prussia. You think your misery is just a British problem. You think it's just a quirk of parliament or your local factory owners.
It's not.
The exact same system is starving weavers in Germany, and they are fighting the exact same enemy you are. That's powerful.
By drawing that connection, Engels is laying the critical groundwork for international working class solidarity.
Workers of the world, basically.
Exactly. He is showing them that their condition is a universal symptom of the system itself. National borders just don't matter when the economic exploitation is identical.
Man, so we have Marx in Paris, shedding his Hegelian idealism, and discovering that the material economy drives the state and the law.
Right.
And we have Engels in Manchester, looking at raw data, reporting on riots, and discovering that the factory system creates the same class struggle universally.
Two entirely different methodologies.
Two different paths up the mountain, and then the paths finally converge in print.
Yes, this is where it all comes together, just before they actually meet in person.
Okay, set the scene for this convergence.
So early in 1844, a journal is published in Paris called the Deutsch-Französische Jahrbucher.
The German-French annals.
Right. It was co-edited by Marx and another radical named Arnold Rouge.
I read about this journal, and it is a spectacular publishing failure, isn't it?
Oh, from a business and logistical perspective, it was a complete disaster.
What happened?
Only a single double issue ever appeared.
One issue.
Just one. They tried to smuggle copies into Germany, but the Prussian border police confiscated hundreds of them at the border.
Of course they did.
And the authorities immediately issued arrest warrants for Marx and the other contributors. The financial backing dried up, Marx and Rouge had a falling out over politics, and the journal just folded almost immediately.
But historically speaking.
Historically, it is arguably one of the most important single publications of the 19th century.
Because of who was in it.
Without question, because of what was contained in that single issue. You have Marx contributing 2 absolutely foundational essays.
Which ones?
On the Jewish question and the contribution to the critique of Hegel's philosophy of law introduction.
Okay, so these are the exact texts where he announces that the critique of religion must turn into the critique of law and politics.
Right.
And ultimately into the critique of the material conditions of society.
Yes, it's his big pivot. And in that exact same issue, you have Friedrich Engels contributing an essay called Outlines of a Critique of Political Economy, as well as an article called The Condition of England.
I want to paint a picture of this for you listening. Just imagine holding this single, heavily censored, historically loaded journal.
Fresh off the press.
The ink is barely dry. You open it up. On one page, you have Karl Marx, who has arrived at his conclusions by wrestling with dense Hegelian philosophy, French revolutionary history, and the abstract concept of the state.
Coming from the clouds down to the earth.
Exactly. And on another page, you have Friedrich Engels, who has arrived at his conclusions by walking the slums of Manchester, analyzing British factory reports, and reporting on raw, physical uprisings for newspapers.
Coming from the factory floor up to the theory.
And when you read their essays side by side in this journal, the alignment is just staggering.
It really is. Both men, completely independently of each other, arrive at the exact same conclusion: that any social system resting on private property and exploitation must be actively opposed.
They both hit the same bullseye.
More importantly, both of them independently identify a specific material force that has the power to change it.
The proletariat.
Yes. They both see the emancipation of the working class as the key to freeing humanity from the contradictions of capitalism.
That is the absolute serendipity of history. I mean, 2 brilliant, dense thinkers approaching the exact same problem from 2 totally different angles, and they land on the exact same page of the exact same short-lived journal at the exact same time. It's wild.
And that meeting in the text precedes their actual physical meeting, because Volume 3 of the collected works ends in August 1844.
And that date is not arbitrary.
No, August 1844 is the cinematic moment. It's when Marx and Engels finally meet in person in Paris.
The famous meeting.
They spend 10 days together at the Café de la Régence in Paris.
Just talking.
Just talking, drinking, debating. Over those 10 days, they discuss everything they had been independently working on. And they realize they are in complete, absolute agreement on all theoretical fields.
Like finding your intellectual soulmate.
That 10-day meeting kicks off a lifelong partnership, and it marks the beginning of Volume 4 of the collected works, starting with their first joint project, the Holy Family.
Which brings us to the lifelong legacy of what they built in 1843 and 1844. Because the foundation they laid in Volume 3 essentially dictates the output of the next 47 volumes of their lives.
Yeah, it sets the trajectory for everything that follows.
Right. So how exactly did this specific 18-month window permanently shape their methodology moving forward? Like, how did it change how they looked at the world?
Well, they never lost the dialectical materialist lens they forged during this time. Once they realized that you have to look under the hood at the engine, at the political economy, they applied that exact lens to every single historical event for the rest of their lives.
And the sources give us some really fantastic examples of this.
Oh, definitely.
Like later on, when they were writing journalism about the Crimean War in the 1850s, which is covered in volumes 13 through 15, they don't just treat it as a typical military spat over territory or religious rights.
Which is how the mainstream press reported it, of course.
Exactly. Just kings squabbling over land.
But they don't see it that way. No, they approach the conflict as a clash of economic and class systems. They analyze Tsarist Russia not just as a hostile foreign power, but as the absolute bulwark of feudal reaction.
Like a massive roadblock.
Right, a roadblock that was threatening the development of the working class movement in Europe. They viewed the entire geopolitical war through the lens of class struggle.
And they do the exact same thing with the U.S. Civil War in the 1860s, right?
Yes, they wrote extensively about it.
They were writing about it. And they didn't just see it as a political or constitutional dispute over states' rights or just a moral crusade.
No. They analyzed the American Civil War as an inevitable, violent collision between 2 incompatible economic systems.
The engine tearing itself apart.
Exactly. You had the southern system of plantation slavery on one side and the northern system of industrial capitalism on the other.
And they recognized that those two modes of production could not coexist on the same continent indefinitely. One had to destroy the other.
Precisely. They applied that methodology to the British oligarchy, to global economic crises, to the opium trade in China.
To everything.
Everything. They analyzed everything through the lens of material realities. Who owns what, how things are produced, how wealth is distributed. It's the exact methodology they first developed in Paris and Manchester in 1843 and 1844.
It's a striking reminder of the value of having a foundational framework, you know?
It really grounds you.
Yeah, because we live in a world of absolute information overload today. I mean, every day there's a new crisis, a new election, a new war, a new economic panic. It is incredibly chaotic to try and make sense of it all.
It's just noise for a lot of people.
Exactly. But what Marx and Engels developed in Volume 3 was a lens through which to view that chaos. By focusing on the material realities, they created a tool to cut through the smoke and look directly at the engine.
And they utilized that tool for the next 40 years.
And, of course, the ultimate realization of that tool is capital.
The masterpiece.
Yeah, the aborted Less contract of 1845 eventually morphs, after decades of exhaustive research, into the defining monumental critique of the capitalist system.
It's incredible to trace it all back to this 18-month window.
It really is. Looking back over this incredible journey through Volume 3, the progression is almost perfectly symmetrical.
How do you mean?
Well, we started with Marx and Engels as independent radical thinkers in totally different worlds, right? Marx is in the intellectual hothouse of Paris, dismantling Hegelian idealism to discover that economics drives the law and the state. And meanwhile, Engels is in the industrial grid of Manchester, observing the grim reality of the factory system and recognizing that the class struggle is a universal condition, whether you are a weaver in Silesia or a spinner in England.
They are on parallel tracks.
We saw them simultaneously break through to a new understanding of political economy and sociology. And finally, we saw them land on the exact same pages of the Deutsch-Französische Jahrbuch, aligning perfectly just before their historic 10-day meeting in August 1844.
It is the documentation of a profound intellectual awakening. It shows how revolutionary ideas are not just born in a vacuum of abstract thought.
No, they're not.
They are forged by the harsh material conditions surrounding the thinkers themselves.
And I want to leave you with a final thought to chew on today, something to think about long after this deep dive is over. Think back to that publisher in Darmstadt, Karl Marx.
Oh, the canceled contract.
Yeah. What if Lesk hadn't gotten cold feet? What if he hadn't canceled Marx's book contract in 1846 out of fear of the police?
It's a fascinating what if.
If Marx had successfully published a rough, early, perhaps less rigorous version of his economic theories back then, when he was just in his 20s, would he have ever felt the driving, obsessive need to spend the next 2 decades in the British Museum?
Meticulously researching every detail.
Right. Meticulously researching and writing the thousands of world-altering pages of Capital. I mean, who knows?
He might have just been satisfied with the early draft.
Exactly. Sometimes a closed door or a canceled contract is the very thing that shapes history.